So how would you feel if your entire cultural identity was erased? Right? If I, or someone other than yourself, decided that you just weren't important enough to be written down. Or if your history was written down, then that record then wasn't kept. Or if that record was written down and that record was kept, someone subsequently decided to go back and describe your history not in the way that you would, but rather in their perspective of you. So in any of these cases, the question that I'm asking is, if your history isn't recorded and preserved, well, did you exist? Well, yes, of course I existed. Of course I mattered. My identity, my personhood on this planet means something. Unfortunately, that is not, in fact, the case. You see, history is not just everything now backwards, right? That is something that we call the past. And history is also not just a catalog of events put into the right order. History is, in fact, a series of strategically curated decisions, right? Decisions that have the ability to either uplift some or silence others. And those choices, those decisions are made by people like myself, people like archivists, librarians, scholars, researchers. But regardless, they are still decisions. And herein lies the impact, the power of bias and privilege with the ability to create entire silenced landscapes of people groups entirely based on the decision of either being included or excluded from history making. And so what ends up happening is that we implicitly trust the evidence that we find in an archive, right? We see letters or photographs in these archives as the closest thing to actually being there. But we tend to overlook the biased decision-making practices of the archivist or of the history gatekeeper about what you found in that archive and what you didn't. So we look at these letters and photographs and we think about, well, whose letters did I find? But whose letters will I never find? And what was the position or the person or the perspective of the individual letters that I found? And whose perspective and positions will I never find? I feel like it's quite unfathomable to understand the 99.99999% of first-person experience that will never be remembered, that has been purposefully oppressed, suppressed, or buried from history. And so in its simplest terms, the inclusion or exclusion of documents or of things from history making is an assertion of power, right? And such has been the case of African American history in this country. And so if you were interested in better understanding or having evidence of African American culture in this country, you might look at the Charles Teeny Harris Archive. So Charles Teeny Harris was a photographer for the Pittsburgh Courier, one of the most influential Black newspapers of the 20th century. And he worked in photographing the everyday lives of African Americans here in this community, as well as the everyday celebrities, such as the Duke Ellingtons, the Muhammad Alis, the Martin Luther Kings of the world. He photographed all of these individuals as they were coming in and out of Pittsburgh. But he's probably most famous for photographing the Hill District during the height of the jazz era. And so at this time, you're going to have a lot of artists, such as Billy Eckstine and Billy Strayhorn, Duke Ellington, Lena Horne, Nina Simone, Mary Lou Williams, Errol Garner. The list truly goes on and on and on of artists coming in and out of Pittsburgh being photographed by Teeny Harris. But now, looking back, we might ask, well, what happened to the Hill District? Well, one way to create these silenced landscapes that I mentioned earlier is to use the tool, I guess, of urban renewal to physically create silenced landscapes. So in the case of the Hill District here in Pittsburgh, the entire lower half of that neighborhood was destroyed in order to build the civic arena, which was then destroyed. But now, looking back, the only evidence that we have of this cultural icon, of this thriving community, is in individuals' memories, and thankfully captured visually in the Teenie Harris photographs. So, as an archivist, as the Teenie Harris archivist, we are trying to break down some of those traditionally held archival practices by actually trying to uplift a people's voice and a people's history. Now, we do this by actually asking the community how they would like to be remembered, and then recording those stories according to their own standards and vocabularies. Because we believe, above all else, that the collective power of memory has the ability to propel life forward into contemporary relevance. We understand that the beliefs and the ideas held in common by many individuals have the ability to create solidarity and community. So, as an archivist, one of the things that I am trying to do in order to break down these traditionally held practices by better understanding archival theory such as selection, appraisal, and description is to create these new forms of archival theory that include racially conscious and culturally competent practices. So, racially conscious, culturally competent archival theory seeks to apply as many, if not all, of these attributes as possible when recording the history of a people group. Because we understand that if we continue to ignore how bias and privilege create large gaps in history making, we will continue to have histories that look the same way that they do now. So, as an archivist, I am striving every day towards the upliftment of a people and of a voice, because I truly believe that when marginalized and underdocumented individuals and groups are actually able to champion for themselves, their property, and their culture, maybe then we can feel more assured that we are actually building a history that is reflective and inclusive of all of us by heeding the voices of those who have been traditionally silenced by historiography. Thank you.